My name is Ella. I'm 30 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life tending blooms in a tiny flower shop right on the main street of our quiet little town. My days are plain, uneventful, free of dramatic twists and turns, but there's one heavy, inescapable weight hanging over me at all times: my birth family. I was born with severe congenital asthma. This illness is woven into every cell of my body. I can never go anywhere without my rescue inhaler, and every single breath I take demands far more caution than any healthy person could ever fathom. Yet my parents, Roger and Martha, have never truly cared about how fragile my body is, not for as long as I can remember. They don't care about their family's health or genuine, warm kinship. Their entire lives revolve around one shallow goal: appearances. To every neighbor, friend, and acquaintance in town, our household has to look like the perfect model family: a husband and wife madly in love after 40 years of marriage, 2 obedient, well-behaved adult kids, a comfortable, harmonious home with no friction whatsoever. The cold unfairness behind closed doors, the endless physical pain and quiet grief I swallow day in and day out, none of that matters to them. A random stranger's compliment, an envious glance from a neighbor, these trivial bits of outside validation outweigh every bit of my suffering. Their 40th wedding anniversary became the peak of this lifelong obsession with putting on a perfect show. They started planning the lavish celebration a full month early, pouring endless time and money into crafting the most impressive social spectacle the county had ever seen. They rented the largest, most ornately decorated banquet hall within town limits, booked top-tier catered meals and luxury dessert platters, ordered brand-new custom formal wear, and hand-delivered fancy paper invitations to every local neighbor, distant relative, old high school classmate, and casual acquaintance within miles. Wherever they went that month, they bragged nonstop about their flawless marriage, blessed pair of children, and trouble-free, prosperous life, desperate for every resident in town to witness their so-called perfect life story. My younger brother Caden is 25. He drifts through life without a single steady, legitimate full-time job, jumping from one meaningless temporary gig to another before quitting at the first hint of responsibility. He's perfectly content to leech off our parents full-time. The brand-new pickup truck he drives, the downtown apartment he rents with a monthly mortgage payment, every little indulgence he splurges on, all of it is funded by the life savings our parents scraped and sacrificed to build over decades. Even so, in Roger and Martha's eyes, Caden is the family pride, their go-to bragging point, the only child who will ever bring honor to their household in the future. I could not be more different. At 30, I run my flower shop entirely on my own 2 feet. I never ask my parents for a single dollar, live a modest, steady, responsible life, and yet I'm always labeled the burden, the disappointing child who drags down their flawless public image. My chronic, life-altering breathing disorder is never seen as genuine vulnerability. They write it off as childish fussiness, a cheap trick to grab attention and stir up trouble. The evening before the banquet, I finished tallying up the flower shop's monthly accounts, locked the glass front door, and walked back home. I'd barely changed out of my work clothes when Martha called me into the living room, her face rigid and solemn, speaking to me not as a mother to her daughter, but like a supervisor issuing a strict official order with zero warmth. She stood over the ironing board, pressing her custom anniversary gown, never lifting her eyes to meet mine, her tone cold and uncompromising. "Ella, let me lay this out straight for you. Tomorrow's 40th anniversary gala is the most important day of your father's and my entire lives. We'll only get this once. Every person we know in town, plus relatives driving in from neighboring cities, will be there, and all eyes will be on our family. You will behave flawlessly. No mistakes, no outbursts of any kind." Roger looked up from the local newspaper he'd been reading, tossed the paper roughly onto the oak coffee table with an audible huff of irritation, and cut in immediately. "Your mother's exactly right," he grumbled. "No sullen moods, no sour faces, and above all, don't claim your asthma's acting up every 5 minutes. You've lived with this minor ailment your whole life and gotten through fine every time. Don't pull that sympathy-seeking stunt at such an important event just to ruin everyone's good time." I stood alone in the middle of the living room, a familiar tight ache clamping down on my chest, my throat constricting as waves of suppressed hurt washed over me. I spoke softly, a quiet plea woven into my voice, hoping they might finally listen to the plain truth. Dad, it's not an act. You know crowded, stuffy rooms with no fresh air irritate my airways instantly. The spasms kick in automatically, and I have no way to control them. My honest explanation only stoked Roger's frustration even hotter. He shot me a sharp, disdainful glare, the disgust and harsh judgment in his gaze impossible to hide. There you go again, he snapped. This is how you've always been. Every time our family has something nice planned, you manufacture some kind of health issue to mess it all up. Every other kid in this town is healthy, upbeat, well-adjusted. Only you carry this permanent cloud of sickness and gloom everywhere you go. I'm warning you, Ella. If you embarrass us in front of all our guests tomorrow and wreck the celebration, your mother and I will never forgive you. Martha set her iron down at once and turned aside with a scolding, her words sharp with blame and warning. Can you not act with more maturity? Do you have any idea how much money and effort we've poured into this night? Caden will meet dozens of respected elders and professional contacts tomorrow. This could be his chance to build connections, land a stable job, and finally get his life on track. Don't let your petty self-absorption ruin your brother's future and erase the family reputation we've spent 40 years building. I stared blankly at the two people who raised me, my heart turning cold inside my chest, feeling like I was looking at total strangers. They gave me life, fed me, clothed me through childhood, yet they had never truly understood my illness. They never sat up with me through violent midnight asthma attacks, never watched me gasp for air on the brink of suffocation, never pitted the constant medication, endless caution, and quiet hardship that define every single day of my life. In their minds, every single health crisis I endure is a manipulative ploy to steal attention and sabotage their carefully crafted perfect family persona, the unforgivable flaw that ruins their precious public standing. I bit my lower lip hard, swallowing all my grief, resentment, and hurt deep down inside, then nodded slowly in surrender. I understand. I'll hold myself together tomorrow, won't cause any trouble, and won't spoil the evening for anyone. That night, I retreated to my bedroom hours early, shutting the door to block out my cold, demanding family. I pulled my portable rescue inhaler out of my nightstand, wiped it spotless with a soft cloth, and tucked it securely into the pocket of the pale, light-colored formal dress I planned to wear the next day. I repeated a quiet mantra to myself over and over as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Just get through one day. Hold on until the banquet ends. Do whatever it takes to stay calm and steady, so I don't give them a reason to criticize me, so I can finish playing my small part in their grand performance of perfect respectability. My best friend Megan works as a full-time attending pulmonologist at the local public hospital, and she's the only person on earth who truly cares about me and understands everything I go through. I told her all about the banquet ahead of time, and she knew full well how dangerous crowded, enclosed spaces could be for my sensitive respiratory system. Unwilling to leave me alone to fend for myself, she swapped her scheduled overnight hospital shift last minute so she could attend the gala with me, ready to watch over my condition at every moment. The 40th anniversary banquet opened promptly at 6 o'clock the following evening. The entire hall glowed with warm string lighting, decked out with elaborate floral arrangements, balloons, and twinkling decorative lights lining every wall. Soft instrumental background music played on a loop, and the air filled with mingled aromas of grilled meat, fancy pastries, and sparkling champagne. Every prominent local resident, relative, and old friend filled the space, hundreds of guests milling around chatting and laughing, creating a grand, bustling, lively atmosphere. I slipped into a simple, understated pale gown and deliberately positioned myself at the absolute far edge of the banquet hall, trying to blend into the background as much as possible. I breathed shallow and slow, barely moving from my spot, and avoided heavy food entirely, terrified the mix of perfume, cigarette smoke, alcohol fumes, and cooking grease floating through the air would irritate my fragile airways and trigger an asthma flare-up. My nerves stayed taut the entire time, every breath carefully regulated to stay stable. My family, meanwhile, soaked up every bit of the spotlight they'd spent a month preparing for. Roger paraded through the crowd in his brand custom-tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed, grinning nonstop as he shook hands with old co-workers and friends, reciting his scripted lines about 40 years of happy marriage and harmonious family life to cement his image as a devoted husband. Martha glided between groups of local housewives in an ornate floor-length gown layered with fine jewelry, gossiping and competing subtly with the other women, never missing a chance to boast about her 2 children and easy, comfortable lifestyle. Caden radiated self-assured pride, dressed head to toe in brand-new designer clothes, weaving smoothly through the crowd to greet elders with polite, formal pleasantries, putting on the act of a hard-working young man with a bright future to earn praise from every older guest around him. Only I knew the truth. Every expensive piece of clothing he wore, the truck he drove, the apartment he paid a mortgage on, all purchased by draining our parents' life savings completely. He contributed nothing financially to the household, spent his days idle with no steady source of income, and was a textbook lifelong freeloader. The 3 of them basked nonstop in compliments, envious stares, and flattery from every guest in attendance, utterly thriving in the spotlight. I remained an invisible outsider huddled alone in the shadows, quietly enduring the stuffy, thick, oppressive air and fighting to suppress the physical discomfort building inside my chest. For the first 2 hours, sheer force of will kept my breathing stable. But as more and more guests packed into the already full hall, ventilation grew weaker by the minute, the air thickening with layer upon layer of harsh, overwhelming scents that choked off any fresh oxygen circulation. A familiar suffocating tightness began creeping through my ribcage, impossible to shake off. I pressed one palm gently to my chest, drawing tiny, slow breaths, forcing down the urgent urge to cough. I kept repeating to myself, just a little longer. The night will wrap up soon. Don't have an attack, don't mess up the perfect image they've worked so hard to build. I brushed my fingertips over the inhaler tucked safe inside my dress pocket, the solid plastic shape calming my nerves slightly. I thought if my symptoms got too bad, 1 dose would calm my spasms and let me hold on a little longer. I had no way of knowing this asthma attack would be far more violent, sudden, and life-threatening than any I'd suffered before, striking without warning, leaving me 0 time to prepare or save myself. At 6:30 in the evening, the banquet hit its peak celebration moment. The live band struck up a cheerful anniversary melody, every guest lifted their champagne glasses in a unified toast, and my parents stepped onto the central stage to accept the room's thunderous applause and well wishes. In that exact instant, my bronchial tubes seized violently, contracting shut in one brutal spasm, as if an invisible fist squeezed my lungs closed completely, cutting off every route for oxygen to enter my body. In that terrifying split second, I could not draw a single breath. Pure, deadly suffocation crashed over me all at once. That raw, suffocating terror and unendurable agony is burned into my soul for life, a memory I will never outrun. It felt as though 2 heavy palms were clamped hard over my nose and mouth, crushing my windpipe shut entirely. No matter how wide I strained my jaws, no matter how desperately I fought to draw air into my lungs, not a single wisp of fresh oxygen reached me. My ribcage swelled tight with unbearable pressure, sharp stabbing pains lancing through every bone with each futile gasp. A high, shrill wheeze tore free from my throat, shrill and eerie, cutting sharply through the banquet hall's loud chatter and upbeat music, impossible for anyone nearby to miss. I doubled over the solid oak dining table in front of me, white-knuckling its polished edge as violent, uncontrollable tremors racked my entire frame. A brutal, unrelenting fit of racking coughs seized my body one after another, each spasm sent searing pain ripping through my chest, as if every internal organ had slipped out of its place. Hot, uncontrolled tears blurred my vision completely, streaming down my cheeks without pause. Within mere seconds, my brain starved of oxygen, spinning heavy and foggy. The glittering party lights swirled and blurred into smudges of pale color, the cheerful chatter and band music faded into a distant, muffled drone. It was as if I'd fallen endlessly into a pitch-black, airless void with 0 trace of life. I could feel my skin draining of all color in real time, my fingers and toes going icy and numb, every muscle turning limp and weightless. I no longer had the strength to hold myself upright. I knew my body better than anyone. This was a critical, life-threatening severe asthma exacerbation, the most dangerous tier of attack recognized by pulmonology standards. If even a few more minutes slipped by without intervention, my airways would lock permanently, my respiration would halt entirely, and I would collapse into fatal respiratory shock, never to wake again. I scraped together the last fading shred of strength left in my body, trying to lift one hand to grab the rescue inhaler tucked in my dress pocket. But my fingers had gone rigid and numb, shaking too violently to coordinate even a simple movement. I could not locate the hem of my pocket, and my arm grew heavier by the second, nearly too weak to lift at all. I was hunched over the table, teetering on the edge of total collapse, death mere heartbeats away, when my father Roger spotted my catastrophic state first. He'd been laughing and clinking glasses with a group of his old friends, trading light small talk, when his peripheral vision caught my shaking, gasping, broken form bent over the tabletop. A tiny, foolish flicker of hope sparked deep in my fading chest. No matter how cold he was, no matter how obsessed he was with public appearances, surely a father's basic instinct would kick in at the sight of his daughter dying before his eyes. Surely he would step forward to steady me, to fish my emergency inhaler out for me. But reality crushed that fragile hope to dust. No flicker of worry or panic crossed his face, only boiling irritation, unmasked disgust, and unbridled anger. He strode straight over to my side, towering over my crumpled, gasping frame, his brows drawn tight into a furious scowl. He rolled his eyes dramatically for the ring of onlooking guests, his tone sharp, bitter, and unforgiving, pitched just loud enough for every nearby attendee to hear crystal clear. "What on earth kind of tantrum are you throwing now, Ella?" he snapped. "I explicitly told you first thing this morning not to stir up trouble or fake sickness to grab attention. Can't you stand to see us happy for one night? Do you have to stage this whole dramatic scene to ruin our anniversary and embarrass our entire family in front of everyone we know?" His words crashed over me like a bucket of freezing ice water, snuffing out the last faint spark of warmth left in my heart, leaving me hollow and numb with despair. I parted my lips to plead my case, to scream that this was no act, that I was suffocating to death, but my throat was fully constricted shut. All I could produce were broken, raspy, gurgling whimpers, and every shallow, labored inhale dragged a tearing agony through my chest cavity. Seconds later, my mother Martha hurried over through the crowd. She stared straight at my ashen, bloodless face, my blue-tinged lips, my trembling, failing body. She saw every sign that I was minutes from death, and yet compassion never crossed her mind. Her first reaction was to scold and reprimand me publicly, consumed entirely by the humiliation I'd supposedly brought upon her polished public image. Her jaw tightened tight with mortification, and she hissed a sharp reprimand at me, thick resentment oozing from every word. "How can you be so immature and selfish? This has always been your little trick, pretending you're deathly ill to put on a show and fish for pity from strangers. Tonight is your father's and my 40th wedding anniversary. The whole town is here watching us, and you picked this exact moment to pull this stunt? Do you want every single person in this county laughing at our family? Stand up straight this instant," she ordered coldly. "It's nothing more than a little shortness of breath. Suck it up and stop making a spectacle of yourself. Don't block everyone's good time, and don't throw away the family reputation we've spent 40 years building over such a trivial fit." My grip on the table's surface weakened more and more by the second, my vision blackening completely at the edges, my consciousness slipping fast. A high-pitched ring filled my ears, drowning out the sound of their cruel, accusatory words almost entirely. The physical agony of suffocation flooded every inch of my body, layered on top of the sharp, stabbing heartbreak of being abandoned and condemned by my own parents. The dual torment pushed me to the brink of complete breakdown. I was not faking illness. I truly was dying, and my own birth parents, standing mere feet away, watching every second of my mortal struggle, remained utterly convinced I was just being dramatic, staging a scene to wreck their celebration. More and more guests noticed the commotion, pausing their conversations to turn and stare. Curious, confused, even sympathetic gazes settled over my broken frame, then swiveled in unison to land on my parents' cold, unkind faces. Shame and embarrassment crashed down hard on Roger and Martha. Still, they never paused to reflect on their own cruelty. Instead, they shifted every ounce of blame onto me, growing angrier under the crowd's collective gaze, fully convinced my childish misbehavior had shattered their carefully crafted perfect family facade. Roger's expression darkened further, his tone harsher and more unyielding as he barked his demand. "Drag yourself over to that far corner and stay there," he snapped. Quit standing dead center of everyone's line of sight, making a fool of yourself. If you can't behave properly, don't bother joining the party at all. Go hide somewhere and leave the rest of us to enjoy the night. Martha stepped forward and gave me a sharp, light shove, not a gentle hand to steady me, an impatient, dismissive push meant to banish me from public view entirely. Go on, get out of sight, she huffed. Crouch down in that dark corner and calm your little fake spell. We've watched this exact performance 100 times over 30 years. No one here's buying your phony suffering. This is nothing but petty attention-seeking. That single careless shove stripped me of my last remaining physical strength. I released my hold on the dining table entirely, stumbling unsteadily across the carpeted banquet hall floor, my legs far too weak to support my weight. I dragged myself to the darkest, most isolated empty corner at the back of the room, then crumpled down to the floor, curling into a small, trembling ball pressed against the cold plaster wall. My back flattened against the hard, icy drywall, and I surrendered fully to the unrelenting asthma attack ravaging my respiratory system. My airways were nearly sealed shut by this point. Every shallow, desperate inhale scraped against my throat and inflamed lungs like sharp razor blades, bringing waves of unendurable pain. My skin turned ghost pale, my lips deep blue from oxygen deprivation, my fingertips numb and lifeless. Tiny involuntary muscle spasms twitched through my frame nonstop as my vital bodily functions began shutting down one by one. My consciousness frayed rapidly, slipping away like loose sand through my fingers. The overhead lights blurred into indistinct gray smudges, the party's laughter and music growing faint, distant, as if echoing from a separate world. I could feel death's shadow wrapping tight around me, my life force draining away second by unforgiving second. I summoned one final burst of willpower to lift my arm and reach for my inhaler, but my limbs had turned dead weight, completely unresponsive to my brain's frantic signals. Only one crushing, hopeless thought echoed through my fading mind. I'm going to die right here, collapsed on the carpet floor of my parents' anniversary banquet. And they won't care at all. A few short feet away, my parents returned to their circle of guests, grinning, exchanging pleasantries, and accepting warm congratulations once again, soaking up the spotlight and the flawless social status they valued above all else. They never spared a single backward glance in my direction, never wondered if I was alive or fading fast. To them, my life counted for far less than their public good name. My younger brother Caden stood motionless within the crowd the entire time, witnessing every second of my catastrophic collapse, watching our parents berate and cast me aside while I teetered on the brink of death. He clearly saw my blue lips, my shaking failing body, my desperate broken gasps for air. Yet he did nothing to intervene, said nothing to defend me, offered no single gesture of comfort or aid. He simply kept chatting and laughing casually with his group of young friends, treating his dying older sister like a complete stranger with no blood tied to him whatsoever. His selfish indifference ran just as cold and deadly as our parents' unbridled cruelty. In that shadowed, suffocating corner of the banquet hall, every ounce of love, loyalty, and quiet hope I'd held for my blood family across 30 long years shattered completely beyond repair. I stopped craving their elusive affection. I stopped waiting endlessly for their hard-won validation. I stopped clinging to the naive childhood dream of a warm, loving household united by mutual care. If I passed away crumpled on that carpet floor, I knew they would only feel relieved that I had finally stopped ruining their perfect celebratory night. As my eyelids fluttered shut and endless black darkness prepared to swallow my consciousness forever, fast, rushing footsteps raced straight toward my collapsing body. A warm, desperate voice cut through the high-pitched ringing filling my ears, the sole sound of genuine kindness remaining in that cruel, hollow banquet room. It was Megan, my only savior, my only real family. Megan had been chatting softly with a handful of familiar guests on the far side of the banquet hall, but my condition never slipped from the back of her mind. Every few minutes, she'd glance over to check the quiet corner where I'd stationed myself. She knew my body far too well, this stuffy, overcrowded room thick with conflicting perfumes, smoke, and cooking fumes was a lethal trigger for my sensitive airways, and she kept a silent, constant watch on me all night long. The crowd had grown deafening and chaotic a moment prior, and for a split second her focus drifted. When she instinctively turned to find me again, Panic crashed over her in an instant. I was no longer in my safe little nook. Instead, I lay crumpled, motionless, drained of all life against the darkest stretch of back wall. She didn't spare a single second to say goodbye to anyone, her stiletto heels slipping sideways as she sprinted flat out toward me. The gentle, warm smile she'd worn all evening vanished in an instant, replaced by the sharp, taut gravity only a seasoned emergency pulmonologist carries, raw, urgent terror tangled with professional dread. She dropped to her knees without hesitation, steadying my shaking, limp shoulders with firm palms. Her fingers flew instantly to my carotid artery to track my fading pulse, then her gaze darted fast over my ashen complexion, blue-tinged lips, and shallow, barely perceptible rise and fall of my chest. Just 2 seconds of clinical assessment, and her own face drained completely of color, every muscle in her frame locking tight with alarm. I could feel the faint tremor in her fingertips against my skin, hear her own rapid, ragged breathing beside my ear. After years treating countless critical respiratory cases, she built unshakable composure in crisis, but this was different. This was me, her best friend, teetering on the razor-thin line between life and death, and genuine, unvarnished fear surged through every word and movement. "Ella, look at me. Don't close your eyes," she said, patting my cheek lightly to rouse my foggy consciousness, her voice urgent yet rock-solid with resolve. "Stay with me. You have to hold on. Listen to me. Don't slip away." I forced my lids to flutter half open, my blurry vision fixing only on the one person who'd panicked over my safety. I still couldn't form a single full word through my constricted throat. All I could manage were faint, raspy whimpers, not even enough strength to nod my head in acknowledgement. Megan wasted no precious breath on hesitation. She knew every passing second stacked another layer of mortal risk on my already failing lungs. She snapped her head up toward the roaring, distracted crowd and screamed at the top of her lungs, her clear, urgent tone cutting clean over every speaker, band track, and burst of laughter, silencing the hundreds of guests in one sharp beat. "Everyone quiet down right now. Call 911 immediately. We need an ambulance now." The entire hall fell dead silent. Every guest froze mid-step, mid-conversation, mid-toast, every head twisting toward our shadowed corner, their faces etched with stunned confusion and shock. The grand banquet space grew, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Megan's voice stayed heavy, unflinching, every syllable ringing clear for every relative, neighbor, and acquaintance in attendance, suppressed panic and simmering anger thrumming beneath her clinical delivery. She's suffering an acute, life-threatening attack of severe congenital asthma. Her airways are nearly fully obstructed. Her pulse is thread-thin, her oxygen saturation is plummeting fast, and her vital signs are catastrophically unstable. One more minute of delay, and she will suffocate to death right here. This is not a tantrum, not fake illness, not petty drama. She's minutes away from fatal shock. That blunt, authoritative medical testimony landed heavy on every ear in the room, rewriting every guest's earlier impression of the scene in an instant. The air turned thick and stifled, every pair of eyes shifting hard. The crowd finally grasped the awful truth. My parents had publicly berated me for faking symptoms, accused me of staging a spectacle to ruin their celebration, while I fought a literal battle for oxygen at their feet. I wasn't being childish or overly sensitive. I'd been dying, and they'd chosen cruelty and vanity over their daughter's life. The next heartbeat, hundreds of unified stares swiveled away from my crumpled frame and locked rigidly onto Roger and Martha, standing stiff a few yards off. Silent, damning judgment wrapped around them like a heavy shroud. My parents froze solid where they stood. The polished, warm smile they'd maintained for the whole night shattered completely, their faces bleached ghost white, every limb rigid and useless, not even a hand raised to mask their overwhelming embarrassment. Minutes prior, they'd stood tall, self-righteous, scolding and banishing me in front of everyone, convinced I'd manufacture my suffering to steal attention and wreck their party. Now a board-certified pulmonologist had laid the unvarnished truth bare for the whole town to witness. Their own daughter was on the brink of death, and they'd watched on cold, hurling cruel accusations without an ounce of compassion. Crushing shame, mortification, and humiliation crashed over them all at once. The decades-long perfect public persona they'd built, devoted spouses, caring, fair parents, crumbled to dust in front of every person they knew. Their core, selfishness, favoritism, and cold indifference stood exposed for all to see. Even facing a life-or-death emergency, even utterly humiliated before the entire town, their first instinct was never guilt or fear for my safety. They scrambled only to make excuses, to salvage their damaged reputation. Martha's lips trembled non-stop, her cheeks flushing pale red, then ashen white as she forced out shaky, defensive words. "No, this can't be right. She's always throwing little fits and pretending she's sick. It can't possibly be this severe. You must be overstating it." Roger forced his panicked features into a stiff, unyielding scowl, clinging stubbornly to denial rather than admitting fault. "Isn't this a bit of an overreaction? It's just a little shortness of breath. There's no need for an ambulance, no talk of dying. This is blown far out of proportion." Megan's repressed rage ignited fully at their shameless, heartless deflection. She lifted her gaze to pin them down, her eyes sharp and icy, each word a piercing, unforgiving rebuke broadcast loud enough for every guest to hear. "Overblown. I am a pulmonology specialist. I understand her condition better than either of you ever will, and I can read her failing vitals clear as day. She's sliding into full respiratory failure. A few more minutes without emergency care, and she won't survive. You too are her birth parents. You watched her suffocate before your eyes, refused to help, refused to care, and instead shamed and scolded her publicly. Do you possess even a shred of parental conscience? Is your meaningless social standing worth more than your own daughter's life?" Her words were unvarnished, direct, and devastating, stripping every layer of their fake decency away and leaving them with no room to argue, no place to hide. The hall remained utterly silent. No one spoke a word, yet every gaze carried unspoken shock, bitter disappointment, quiet contempt, and quiet sorrow. That silent collective judgment stung far deeper than any shouted reprimand, leaving Roger and Martha drowning in unendurable public shame. Off to the side, Caden stood hunched over, his face flickering between sickly green and flushed red, his head bowed so low he dared not meet a single person's eyes. He never uttered a single word, his silence an unspoken admission of his complicity in all that unfair, cold neglect. He gladly soaked up every ounce of their favoritism and financial support for years, yet stood by passively while his sister fought for her life, selfish enough to make every onlooker recoil. Megan wasted no more time locked in confrontation with them. Saving me came first. She knelt back down instantly to adjust my posture into a position that opened my airways as wide as possible, murmuring constant soft reassurance and encouragement, urging me to hold on, not to give up. Several kind-hearted guests had already dialed 911, clearly relaying the banquet hall address and my life-threatening asthma symptoms to dispatch. Within minutes, the shrill, urgent wail of an ambulance siren cut through the quiet night, growing louder as it raced toward the building. Paramedics burst through the banquet doors hauling full emergency trauma gear, moving with practiced, lightning-fast efficiency to take over my care. They clipped oxygen monitors to my fingertips, administered emergency respiratory medication, placed me on supplemental oxygen, started in 4-line, and performed urgent airway intervention, every precise movement working to stabilize my collapsing vital signs. I drifted in and out of full consciousness, my body stiff, cold, drained of all strength, powerless to resist as the paramedics shifted and treated me. I could feel hundreds of eyes glued to me, to my parents, to this absurd, heartbreaking family tragedy unfolding right in front of the town. The medics quickly lifted me onto a padded emergency stretcher, draped a thick thermal blanket over my shivering frame, and wheeled me briskly toward the front doors and the waiting ambulance. As the stretcher neared the exit threshold, I scraped together one last flicker of fading awareness to glance backward. My parents still stood frozen dead center of the glittering banquet hall. They made no move to chase after me, no trace of panic or genuine grief on their faces, only rigid, awkward stillness as they endured the unkind stares of every guest, clinging desperately to their cheap, ridiculous obsession with appearances. At that moment, every last scrap of hope and longing I'd harbored for loving familial connection over 30 years flickered out completely, gone without a trace, never to be rekindled. The ambulance's rear metal doors slammed shut hard, sealing me off from the banquet hall's noise, coldness, and hollow pretense all at once. Its blaring emergency siren kicked on instantly, carrying my shock-prone, dying form speeding toward the hospital's intensive care unit, far away from the family that had abandoned me to suffocate alone. By the time the ambulance rushed me through the hospital doors, my condition had plummeted to catastrophic lows. My blood oxygen saturation had crashed far below the safe threshold. My heart rhythm was erratic, my pulse faint and thready. My breaths were shallow, ragged and broken. At any second, I could slip into full respiratory or cardiac arrest beyond any hope of revival. The medical team wasted not a single second, wheeling me straight into the intensive care unit and launching a full-spectrum emergency resuscitation protocol without delay. For the entire night, I teetered back and forth along the razor-thin line between life and death, cycling through rounds of emergency intervention, constant monitoring, and vital sign stabilization. Multiple times my vitals dipped to critical, life-threatening levels. Megan never left the ICU waiting room for an hour, pulling an all-night vigil beside the glass partition. She coordinated nonstop with the attending physicians, tracked every update on my rescue progress, handled all administrative medical paperwork, and leveraged every professional connection she had to secure the most advanced, personalized treatment resources possible for me. It was not until dawn the next morning, after more than 12 hours of relentless life-saving care, that my bronchial airways finally relaxed and opened wide again. My oxygen levels climbed steadily back to a stable range, my chaotic heartbeat normalized, and every vital metric settled safely within healthy limits. I was officially out of mortal danger. Later, my attending doctor told me plainly that my survival had been nothing short of a miracle. If emergency aid had been delayed a mere 5 minutes longer, my airways would have clamped shut permanently from spasms. Even aggressive, follow-up resuscitation would almost certainly have failed to bring me back. I remained confined to the ICU for 2 full days before staff transferred me to a standard inpatient ward, slowly regaining full consciousness and physical strength. Though the immediate threat of death had passed, my body stayed devastatingly weak. A dull, heavy ache lingered deep in my chest at all times. My limbs felt leaden and drained, and I lacked even the breath to speak more than a handful of words at once. All I could do was lie motionless beneath the hospital sheets, hooked up to 4 drips, resting quietly to rebuild my shattered stamina. Meanwhile, when the ambulance carried me away, hovering on the brink of death, my parents did not immediately jump into their car and race to the hospital. They did not pick up their phones once to call and check if I was breathing, if my heart still beat, if I might not live through the night. Obsessed with clinging to their hollow, fragile social image, they stubbornly lingered in the emptying banquet hall, forcing themselves to finish out the rest of the anniversary program. They smiled through final goodbyes with every departing guest, clinging to the facade of a flawless celebration, one they had irreparably ruined through their own cold indifference. For 48 full hours, they paid zero mind to whether I lived or died. It was only after I had fully stabilized, exited the ICU, and escaped all lethal risk that they dragged their feet and drove to the hospital for a reluctant visit. This would be their only time setting foot in my room through the entire life-or-death ordeal. When the pair stepped inside the ward, there was no flicker of worry, guilt, sorrow, or regret on their faces. Their gazes were cold, their expressions heavy and sullen. They offered no gentle greeting, no quiet question about my pain, no word of comfort. The very first sentences out of their mouths were unending blame, recrimination, and fault-finding. Martha hurried straight to the side of my hospital bed, her brows crumpled tight with simmering irritation, launching into a litany of scolding the moment she opened her mouth. "You have gone far too far and acted incredibly immaturely this time. We spent an entire month painstakingly planning our 40th anniversary party, a perfect, joyful milestone celebration, and you destroyed every bit of it single-handedly. Now the whole town whispers behind our backs, pointing fingers and calling us cruel, heartless parents who abandoned our dying daughter. Are you satisfied now? You did this on purpose, just to humiliate our whole family publicly." Roger stood beside the ward window, his back fully turned toward my bed, his face dark enough to radiate menace. Every sharp, icy word he spoke shifted all blame squarely onto my shoulders. Everyone was singing our praises before, talking about how harmonious our household was, how fortunate we were with well-raised children. Then you threw that dramatic scene right in front of everyone, leaving us stuck in an impossible position, drowning in gossip and judgment. Word has spread all over town, and Caden's reputation has been dragged through the mud because of you. He could have networked with dozens of respected elders that night and locked down a steady, reliable career. But now every local family views us with bias, and you've wrecked every promising opportunity he had for his future. I lay immobile in the hospital bed, for tubes snaking from my forearm, my body too weak to lift even a single hand, a dull, persistent throb gnawing at my ribcage. As I listened to their emotionless, backwards accusations, the last faint spark of misplaced guilt lingering inside me vanished completely. I met their eyes calmly, my voice rough and barely audible yet steady, unshakable resolve threaded through every syllable. I truly was dying that night. I did not throw a fit. I never set out to ruin anyone's pride and reputation. From start to finish, neither of you cared whether I lived or suffocated right in front of you. Martha's forehead creased tighter still, her tone growing more rigid and stubborn, not a trace of softening in her demeanor. But you pulled through in the end, didn't you? It cannot possibly have been as dire as you claim. Ever since you were small, you exaggerated every little ache and pain, blowing trivial discomfort into a huge spectacle. This whole mess stems from your selfish, over-emotional whims. You only cared about your own fleeting feelings, with zero regard for the whole family standing. Exactly, Roger echoed, spinning around to fix me with a stare thick with disappointment and resentment. If you just acted with a little more maturity and held out for those 2 short hours, the entire party would have wrapped up perfectly, and no one would have faced embarrassment. You're far too self-absorbed and overly sensitive. You're the one who shattered our family's good name all on your own. Megan had stood silent beside my bed the entire time they spoke, absorbing every heartless accusation they hurled my way. Her chest rose and fell fast with suppressed rage, her eyes blazing with stunned, unbridled fury. She had tended to countless cold, distant family members through years of hospital work, yet she had never encountered 2 parents so utterly blind to their daughter's mortal peril, so unwilling to admit fault even after the threat of death had passed. She could hold her tongue no longer. She stepped forward, positioning herself firmly between my bed and my parents, her tone sharp, formal, and grounded in unarguable medical fact. "Sir, ma'am, speaking to you as her attending pulmonologist, I need you to understand plainly, Ella escaped death by the narrowest margin possible. Medical records document the full extent of her airway blockage and catastrophic oxygen drop. Another 5 minutes without intervention, and irreversible brain death would have set in with no chance of revival. You are her birth parents. You watched her gasp for air on the brink of death, offered no aid, felt no pity, and then arrived here only to heap blame and criticism on her. That is not respectable public standing. That is unforgivable coldness." Martha's face flushed bright red, stung by Megan's public rebuttal, digging in her heels with unreasonable, defensive hostility. "This is private family business. A stranger has no right to butt in. How we raise our daughter, how we choose to treat her, is none of your concern whatsoever. A stranger?" Megan let out a bitter, hollow laugh, her tone equal parts forthright and weary. "I am the only person who stayed by her side through critical care, the only one who pulled her back from the edge of the grave. I am far more fit to care for her than her own blood parents. If I hadn't administered emergency aid and called the ambulance that night, you wouldn't be standing here criticizing her right now. You'd be visiting her grave instead." Those words struck them where it hurt most, laying bare their shameful conduct. Roger's complexion alternated between ashen gray and flushed red, unable to summon a single line of defense. Still, not an ounce of remorse crossed either of their faces. No quiet apology passed their lips. Their minds remained fixed solely on the ruined party, their tarnished social standing, and their beloved son whose prospects they claimed I had destroyed. They did not linger another heartbeat. They did not ask how my recovery was progressing, did not offer a single tip for easing my recuperation, did not spare one glance at my pale, frail face resting on the hospital pillow. Martha let out a loud huff of annoyance, flicked her sleeves irritably, and spoke with unmasked impatience. "Fine. It's clear nothing we say will ever satisfy you. Apparently every mistake is ours, never yours. We won't bother checking in on you from this point forward. Do whatever you please. Live your life however you want." With that, the pair turned on their heels and marched out of the hospital room, their footsteps crisp, decisive, and devoid of the slightest hesitation or fondness. The ward door clicked shut behind them, severing the last fragile thread binding us as a family. I understood with absolute clarity that 30 years of father-daughter and mother-daughter ties had snapped completely the moment that door closed. I lay flat on the hospital mattress, staring blankly up at the ceiling, my heart empty and numb. No tears came, no outbursts of grief, no surges of chaotic emotion. After 30 years of swallowing hurt, backing down, and clinging to futile hope for their affection, my eyes had finally opened to the unvarnished truth. My kindness, my quiet compliance, my endless attempts to please them had never earned their love or appreciation. They had only invited deeper neglect and endless exploitation. I turned my head toward Megan beside me, my voice thin yet unwavering. "Find me the top estate attorney in the county. I want a full set of notarized asset protections drawn up to cut every financial tie and eliminate any avenue for them to lay claim to what's mine later on." Megan wrapped her warm hand gently around mine, her tone soft yet unshakably loyal. "I'll arrange every detail immediately, and I'll stay right beside you through every step. From this day forward, you live solely for yourself. No one will ever drain you dry or hurt you again. Every asset registered under my name belonged to my parents and brother in no capacity whatsoever. They were the safety net my maternal grandfather had set aside solely for me long before his passing. Grandpa was the very first elder to ever truly love me. He'd watched me grow up frail and chronically unwell, constantly overlooked and neglected within my own household. So he drafted an airtight will years in advance, bequeathing his entire life savings and a standalone street-front property in the town's prime commercial district exclusively to me alone. The will's terms were laid out in crystal clear, unambiguous language. Every asset was my separate individual property, excluded from shared household assets and any future marital joint estate. My parents, all other blood relatives, and my younger brother held zero rights of inheritance, management, or financial claim over anything I owned. Grandpa had lived a sharp, clear-sighted life, shielding me decades ahead of time from exploitation and leeching at the hands of my birth family. The only reason I'd never drawn a hard line before was my soft heart and lingering attachment to the idea of family bond. That single-family home boasted a spacious layout and an unbeatable location, holding steady value year after year. Even if I shut down my flower shop entirely, the property alone would generate enough steady income to support me comfortably and securely for the rest of my life. The savings Grandpa left behind covered all my daily living costs, medical bills, and retirement needs, freeing me from the need to rely on anyone or kowtow to another's demands. It was the greatest security I'd ever known, the final act of gentle protection and unconditional love my grandfather had gifted me. 4 years, though, my parents had simmered with resentment and greedy covetousness over all of it. In their minds, my wealth was already Caden's by default. They'd long assumed my house would serve as his marital home down the line, and my savings would wipe out his mortgage and auto loan balances to grant him an easy, worry-free life. They'd scrimped and deprived themselves their entire lives, pouring every dollar they earned, every resource they possessed into their idle, unambitious son. They spoiled him without boundaries, enabling every lazy, entitled habit, and willingly devoted themselves to catering to his every whim. It never crossed their minds to question why they should shoulder all of Caden's burdens themselves. They took it as an unspoken given that as the elder sister, I was obligated to sacrifice my own life and fortune to prop him up and subsidize the whole family. Over those 30 years, I had been gentle, compliant, and loyal to the idea of kinship. When household finances grew tight, I'd voluntarily chip in to cover expenses. When Caden fell short on monthly loan payments or wasted his cash on trivial leisure, I'd cave and foot the bill for him time and again. Every compromise, every selfless gesture never earned me gratitude or consideration from them. Instead, it only emboldened their endless demands, made them take my generosity for granted, and culminated in their cold abandonment and vicious verbal attacks the night I nearly suffocated to death. That brush with death in the ICU had woken me up completely. Being soft-hearted was a flaw, endless forbearance a grave mistake. When dealing with self-centered, unfeeling blood relatives, every ounce of tolerance and compromise only inflicts greater harm on yourself. Megan handled every arrangement swiftly and reliably. That very same day, she connected me with the most reputable civil estate attorney in town and locked in the earliest possible consultation and notarization appointment. As soon as my strength recovered enough to leave the hospital, I headed straight to the law firm with Megan by my side to complete the full set of legal asset documentation. Every step of the process was formal, legally binding, meticulously drafted with no loopholes, fully protected under state law. In front of the attorney and official notary public, I formally executed a revised last will and testament alongside an irrevocable voluntary gift notarization agreement. The document stipulated that upon my passing, every piece of real estate, cash savings, and personal wealth inherited from my grandfather would transfer in full, without compensation, solely to my best friend Megan Hayes as her exclusive separate property. The agreement contained explicit clauses stating my father Roger Carter, mother Martha Carter, and brother Caden Carter permanently and voluntarily waive all rights of inheritance, financial claim, and interference pertaining to my estate. They were barred from visiting my residence to beg for funds, harassing me, or filing any lawsuits over my assets at any point in the future, with full legal ownership of all holdings vested solely in Megan. Beyond that, I completed full legal asset separation paperwork, severing every single financial tie linking me to my birth family once and for all. From that moment forward, I would not contribute a single dollar to household costs, would never bail Caden out of debt again, and would no longer adjust my life or finances to accommodate my parents and brother. Their financial hardships, daily expenditures, and personal troubles ceased to be any of my concern whatsoever. The instant all paperwork was finalized and the notary's official seal stamped the documents into legal effect, I stepped out of the law office and into warm sunlight. For the very first time in 30 years, a profound, weightless sense of relief washed over me. The heavy chain of familial obligation that had clamped around my shoulders since childhood had shattered entirely. I'd never raised my voice, never staged a scene, never lashed out with cruel words or sought petty retaliation. I'd acted with complete dignity, following every legal channel calmly and rationally. All I'd done was reclaim what rightfully belonged to me, safeguard the protection Grandpa had left for me, and put an end to endless emotional blackmail and moral exploitation. It was the gentlest, most honorable, yet utterly definitive reckoning I could deliver. Megan watched the quiet relief soften my features and gave my shoulder a gentle, reassuring pat, speaking to me with total sincerity. "Ella, I don't want your house or your money at all. I'm only doing this to keep your security safe for you. No matter what the future brings, I will always be on your side, guarding everything that's yours. No one will ever get to hurt or take advantage of you again." I smiled, a faint, warm glisten gathering at the corners of my eyes. I'd finally learned the truth. The strongest bond in this world is not forged by shared blood, but by genuine devotion and unwavering loyalty. My own flesh and blood had abandoned me and inflicted unspeakable pain, while a friend with no genetic tie to me had gone to every length to shield me and secure my peace. Word of the asset notarization reached my parents through mutual acquaintances within just a few days. At first, they refused to believe it entirely. Their entrenched perception of me was a meek, obedient daughter who'd complied with their wishes all her life. They were convinced this was nothing more than a fleeting fit of anger. I would never permanently cut off their inheritance rights or sign my fortune over to an outsider. They fully expected me to soften, cave in, and reverse the documents after a couple of days cooling off. It was only when the attorney delivered formal legal notification papers to their home, complete with printed legal text, official embossed seals, and full enforceable legal standing, that panic crashed over them in full force. They finally accepted that I had made an unshakable decision, and I would never compromise or back down ever again. A crushing wave of shock and terror overwhelmed them instantly. Their entire long-term plan to rely on my assets to provide Caden a lifelong, effortless existence, to cover his housing and living expenses without end, had crumbled to nothing in a single night. All the greedy schemes they'd nurtured for decades vanished without a trace, leaving them consumed by rage, bitter resentment, blind panic, and boiling frustration. Once my parents realized every last asset was permanently out of their reach, and all rights of inheritance had been completely severed, they dropped their polished facade entirely. They began hounding me relentlessly, throwing shameless tantrums and demanding my property by force. At first, they tried to manipulate me with false affection and guilty pity. They camped out daily in front of my flower shop and my house, weeping loudly about how hard they'd worked to raise me, calling me ungrateful, heartless, and undutiful. They clung to their 30 years of parental grace as leverage, begging me to soften my heart, reverse the legal paperwork, and hand the assets back to the family, to Caden. I remained calm and unshaken through every scene. I never argued, never defended myself, never yielded to sympathy. Each time, I simply presented the official notarized legal documents and told them plainly, every asset is legally and rightfully mine, with clear, undisputed ownership. They had no authority to interfere in any way, and I would not hesitate to call the police if they continued their harassment. When their emotional manipulation failed, they abandoned all pretense of decency entirely, resorting to public outbursts and twisted lies. They wandered the town's supermarket, Central Square, and neighborhood streets, spreading vicious rumors about me. They painted me as an unfilial, rebellious daughter, cold and ungrateful, someone who'd abandoned her birth parents, and helpless younger brother after gaining financial stability, hoarding my wealth and refusing to support my family. They'd hoped, just as they had countless times before, to win public sympathy and pressure me into submission with town gossip, forcing me to surrender my assets to preserve my reputation. But they had severely underestimated everyone in town. Every single person still remembered the unvarnished truth of their 40th anniversary banquet night. Everyone had witnessed it all with their own eyes, how I'd gasped for breath, dying of an acute asthma attack, while my own parents publicly shamed me, cast me aside, and cared nothing for my life. The whole town knew I was not the cruel, unfilial child they portrayed. It was them who'd been ruthless and unfeeling. It was them who'd abandoned their own daughter, choosing empty prestige over their child's life. No matter how they wept and lied, no one in town sympathized or took their side. Instead, everyone watched their theatrics with cold disdain, whispering privately of their selfishness, cruelty, and blatant favoritism. When neighbors encountered their pitiful performances, they either turned away in indifference or cut straight through their deception with blunt honesty. You watched your daughter dying that night, called her faking, and left her to suffer alone, townsfolk would say. Now you come crying for money. Nothing in life is that easy. Others added, you spoiled your son rotten and drained your daughter dry. You ignored her in her darkest hour, and now you try to guilt-trip her for gain. No one will pity you. Exposed and condemned publicly time and again, they gained not an ounce of sympathy. Instead, their true selfish nature became clearer than ever to the entire town, reducing them to a universal laughingstock. The perfect, respectable family image they'd spent decades meticulously building crumbled completely, beyond any hope of repair. For more than 2 weeks, they pestered and hounded me endlessly, yet they never extracted a single dollar or any favor from me. Day after day, they endured the town's judgmental stares and quiet criticism, living in utter embarrassment and humiliation. Meanwhile, Caden, the younger son they had spoiled and coddled his entire life, finally reaped the bitter consequences of his lifelong idleness and parasitism. He had never held a steady job, never learned a basic survival skill, relying entirely on my parents to cover his back his whole adulthood. Every expense for his fancy car and upscale apartment, every monthly mortgage and car payment, was sustained solely by my parents' pensions and life savings. For years, my parents had scrimped on their own needs, drained every penny of their savings, and exhausted themselves to bail Caden out of debt, propping up his superficial, comfortable lifestyle. But after I severed all financial ties and shattered their hopes of inheriting my assets, they wasted massive amounts of time and energy harassing me, draining their last remaining savings entirely. They no longer had the means to cover Caden's exorbitant monthly installments. Lazy, unmotivated, and completely unaccustomed to hard work, Caden had never earned a stable income or lifted a finger to support himself. With his parents' financial safety net gone, he could not afford a single payment. In merely 2 months, he fell drastically behind on all his bills, falling into full default. Following official legal procedures, The bank repossessed his house and car, auctioning them off to settle his debts. Overnight, Caden lost everything. No home, no vehicle, no material possessions. He was reduced once again to an unemployed, penniless drifter, even saddled with leftover outstanding debt. Yet even in his total downfall, Caden never reflected on his own laziness and selfishness. Instead, he shifted all blame onto my parents. He fought and threw tantrums at home daily, accusing them of being incompetent, of failing to secure my assets for him, of ruining his life and plunging the family into chaos. The once peaceful, biased little family, united in spoiling Caden and exploiting me, descended into endless quarrels and internal strife. Their home was filled with constant shouting and conflict, stripped of all its former false warmth and glamour. My parents were left trapped in a miserable, humiliating old age. They'd sacrificed everything to dote on their son and drain their daughter, starving themselves financially for decades for the sake of their family's reputation. In the end, their beloved son turned out useless and ungrateful, only capable of complaining and blaming them. Their once obedient daughter was finally broken cold and gone forever, cutting all ties for good. They now survived on a meager pension, living a tight, impoverished life with no money left for petty comparisons or empty social posturing. The social circles they once obsessed over and competed with shut them out completely. No one was willing to associate with them. No one treated them with genuine kindness. For the rest of their lives, every step outside their doors would be met with neighbors' judgmental glances and cold whispers. They were doomed to live in the endless shame, regret, and humiliation they had created for themselves. The dignity they had valued above all else was shattered to dust. The son they had spoiled rotten became their greatest burden. Every scheme they had plotted and every selfish expectation they had clung to collapsed into total nothingness. As for me, I was finally free from the dragging burden and emotional kidnapping of my toxic birth family. I kept the flower shop and prime real estate my grandfather had left me, slowly nursing my body back to full health. My days grew peaceful, stable, and effortlessly joyful. Freed from endless moral blackmail, financial exploitation, and unfair favoritism, I no longer had to walk on eggshells to please others, no longer had to swallow endless grievances, no longer had to sacrifice my life for their hollow reputation. I remained gentle, calm, and decent at heart, but my kindness was no longer wasted on the selfish and unappreciative. I continued running my flower shop with care, treating every customer with warmth, tending faithfully to my fragile health, and spending every quiet, peaceful day with Megan, the only person who had ever truly stood by me. This long, cold entanglement of fake family affection finally came to an end in the fairest, most dignified way possible. I sought no revenge, inflicted no harm, and started no vicious conflict. I simply used the law to protect my life, forcing those who had acted selfishly and cruelly to bear every bitter consequence of their own choices. Family bonds in adulthood are never one-sided compromise and endurance. Sincerity begets sincerity, while coldness begets distance. The moment they chose to abandon me, they sealed their fate of lonely, shameful old age. After 30 years of hidden suffering and silent tolerance, I finally broke free from my chains, walked toward the light, and claimed a lifetime of peace, freedom, and ease.